going to be looking at how to install the sidewall inserts from InSoFast. And what this system is going to be added to is usually in conjunction with the UX panels. How to install to manufactured specs, sidewall insert, and the UX panel topped over it.
Dealing with flat walls, now you're dealing with a corrugated mess.
Exactly.
How do you do that?
Yeah, so that's what InSoFast came up with a solution for. So we can turn this wall into a flat wall. Now we can do any type of conventional construction. We could wood frame this, we could use mineral wool, a lot of multitude of different ways to do this. But what we're gonna show you is the simplest way that InSoFast has come up with to take this nice, smooth, flat surface now and quickly install an insulated panel that already has the composite studs built into it. The first thing we're gonna have to go over of how to install this system is gonna be our recommended tools and products to install. Number one, this is going to be the recommended glue. It's used for the engineering specifications, and it's going to be a Loctite PL3X Premium. Now, there's a lot of less expensive construction adhesives out there. It does not mean that it's going to perform the same. So when dealing with any of the products, any instructional videos, you got to make sure you abide by manufactured specifications. And in this case, this is the product we recommend, so this is what we're going to be using. And you can get this in 7-ounce tubes as well, but you're never going to want to use that because we're going to go through a lot of it. So generally we recommend these 28-ounce tubes, which will be paired with a larger caulk gun. Now these you can find Home Depot, Harbor Freight, Lowe's, all of your typical conventional hardware stores, as well as Menards. There's all different levels. This would be like your entry-level base caulk gun. It's absolutely fine, and you can go up to the entire big automatic ones if you so need. But we're gonna show you with the most basic level of tools to show you how easy this is and how anybody can do it with a relatively low budget of tools required. Besides that caulk gun, you're gonna need spray foam. Now this is one of the fancier guns. You don't need to use this. You could just get the regular can with the little nozzle on the top. But in this case, we are going to show you the more fancy option, which we love because we do it on a large scale basis. But this is just a spray foam gun. You can actually buy these on Amazon. We'll put a link in the description to these, all this stuff, all the products and the tools. We'll have a link in the description. But this is going to be this red can, which I believe is right? The fire foam?
The fire foam or regular gaps and cracks, it doesn't matter. Actually, to manufacture fire foam is just a colorant.
Okay.
That's the difference between the two. That's
really?
So a fire inspector, a smoke inspector can tell if it's being done.
Gotcha. So this is going to be a closed cell spray foam though, right? That's the biggest thing we're worried about.
The big gaps and cracks or the windows.
Gotcha. And that's why we're not using that window foam or the big gaps and cracks, is generally that's an open cell spray foam. And this is going to be a closed cell spray foam. So generally just make sure if it's fire block and sealer, then you know for sure that's gonna be a closed cell. This is a great product. Again, can be found Lowe's, Home Depot, Menards, all those stores. So besides that, what we typically use is what we like to call the InSoFast shank. It's generally a Sawzall blade that we can tape up with electrical tape, but one of my guys actually found this fancy handle to go on it. But these work out great for a lot of scenarios. It's super easy to cut, and you'll see shortly why this tool comes in handy. And then if you want to get a little fancier with it, you can always go with a good old Sawzall. And we use this quite often. A little razor blade that you can get in the paint departments usually, or again, Harbor Freight, Home Depot, Lowe's. And that's just that literally 98-cent little X-Acto knife that you can just extend that blade. As it gets dull, you can break them off. So that's another product you can use to cut this. Besides the Sawzall, our handy dandy InSoFast shank or adjustable blade X-Acto knife is going to be this multi-tool. They come in handy all the time. And we use them for all different stuff, but we found that these work out awesome for punching out little areas where we need electrical or plumbing, and our fancy little hooks that come in the floor of the container. Rather than trying to cut those hooks off and taking a ton of time, easier to cut the foam. With any one of these tools, we can make this job happen. So let's get into it.
Okay, now what we want with the sidewall insert, what its design purpose was, is to fill the empty airspace in between here. Because the one thing with condensation is you want to reduce the amount of air flow that you get back to the steel. So the less air that can flow back there, the better your interior environment will be.
So that's probably the biggest thing that people have, especially coming from a construction background, is figuring out the way to deal with this corrugated steel. It's not a typical dimension we're gonna find with anything that we can just go to Home Depot and buy off the shelves, but that might be changing. We're using our PL3X and our fancy dancy caulk gun. Now, a lot of people don't know, there's usually a cutter somewhere located on the handle, and right there we've got words that tell us spout cutter. So you can actually put the spout in there and then go and snips it off. And then you want to puncture that tube. So there's gonna be a little tab in there that you gotta rip through that. We'll get that sucker loaded in there. Now it's all powered up and we are good to go. Now, once we get that in there, it's gonna have a tendency to keep coming out of there, but it'll be all right. Now, how we apply this, we wanna make sure we use a good amount, but what we like to do is go in an S-turn, because it's gonna guarantee that we have a nice bond in case this isn't touching in a couple areas. It's gonna be uniform and give us a lot higher probability of ensuring we have a nice tight bond against that outside of that container. And we'll show you once we get to those UX panels and how the system kind of all ties together.
And the reason you're putting that dot on there is so it doesn't keep losing out.
Yep.
Get it all over.
Yeah, so sometimes I'll kind of jam it into an area where I just kind of plug the tube, or if I have a broken off piece that I broke off from where the hooks are going, I'll jam that onto the tip of the gun so it doesn't keep leaking out. But this is as simple as can be. Literally take this and insert into that wall. Make sure you apply even pressure down the whole thing, and voila, that easy. Now you got a flat surface. So we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna apply this across this whole section, all the way up, and then we'll go get into the UX panels. We're gonna show you guys a few little tricks of how to go around these hooks at the bottom. And one way, if you really just wanna go for speed and you got some spray foam and you're not too worried about it, you could literally just go right on top, and then you're gonna spray foam this with our handy dandy foam gun, and then go the UX panel right over the surface. In this case, we're gonna show you, if you wanted to get a little bit more detailed, you can actually take this, give it a nice little tap, you're gonna see that indentation of exactly where it is, and then you could take your fancy dancy tool over here and you can actually just make sure to cut. And then you take your knife, snap that across, and in theory, that should break right off. Now that bad boy should go right in there, nice and tight. We're still gonna spray foam that even after we get it in, but we'll show you that when we get to the next level. All right, so now we got all these lower sections done. We gotta jump up here and do this top section. So what you can do is just put it in just like this, where it just slides up and touches that top, and make a little mark there to break out where you're gonna wanna cut straight across. Now, you can transfer that over to over here, and then just connect the dots, and you're gonna be good that way. Or if you wanted to, you could bust out your old tape measure and just go ahead and measure that and yell it to somebody on the ground who will pre-cut a bunch of those, and in theory, they should be pretty accurate going across because they're manufactured in a mass production setting, so they should all match. If I want to try and maximize my product, take it over here, put a little notch, connect the dots, and I can keep using the same piece to cut a bunch of them so I'm not wasting a lot of product. It says a lot about this product. We put so much R&D into our designs. We only have a one little 15-yard dumpster that we use for manufacturing 15 to 20 units a month. So we have so little waste coming out of this facility. And when we go to dump that, it's ultra lightweight, but generally almost none of this is wasted. We use every single component all over the place in little voids that we need to fill. So think about the conservation of the product and the adhesives, everything that you're using, so you can limit the amount of waste. Take the time to project plan and buy exactly what you need, nothing more and nothing less.
And I gotta say, that just brings a tear to my eye and makes me so happy to hear that you're maximizing the use of the product instead of throwing it away into the waste stream.
Okay, so this is one of those applications where we cut it short, which we showed you in the beginning we could have done on the bottom. In this case, we're just gonna take our film, when we put our UX panels up, we're gonna film this cavity before we put that UX panel up, so that all of this is insulated 100%. So we just wanted to show you, in case you wanted to do it, you know, you're not the most crafty cutter, or you're worried, you cut a piece wrong, it doesn't make it wasted. You could cut it short, you can fill this void with foam, and you're still good to go. So you can kind of see here, these are a little bit short, and what I did was I got one nice and tight there. You got one that's about 1/4 inch. This one's anywhere between 3/8 and 1/2 inch short. Now that's not a big deal at all. You can easily come and foam these, no big worry, because what you'll see is when we get into some of the electrical and plumbing, you're actually gonna remove sections, not of these, but of the next layer, to be able to access stuff. We're just gonna foam those. So it's like an eraser for anything, any mistakes you make, no big deal. It's easily fixable, everything's usable. A lot of people are gonna wonder exactly how many tubes of this glue am I gonna need? And generally you can find it sold by the case of 12, AKA a dozen. And you're generally gonna wanna pick up about 2 cases or 24 tubes to do a 40-foot container. And that can vary based on how much adhesive you're applying to your panels, but you don't wanna go cheap and try and get a limited amount of glue on each panel, because again, this is your liquid fastener you're using. So this is in lieu of all of your mechanical fasteners, screws, nails. So you wanna make sure you're being generous enough that this bonds to the container, but not so generous that you're burning money that's not needed.
And part of what that is, why you want to use the right amount of glue, is the way this is a zippered stud on the back. You want to make sure you get that all in there. And what the glue does is it wraps around and fills in and actually casts it to the panel. So it's gluing to the steel, but casting the panel onto the glue.
Exactly, so that's one thing you're thinking about when you're putting this adhesive on here and it's stacking on top of this. It might look like you have a good amount of glue that's gonna bond to that surface, but as you push it into that wall, it's gonna fill in this void here around this composite stud, and it's gonna be mechanically grabbing, like a mechanical fastener, around all these little plastic fittings here. And that's what your bond is. So we gotta make sure we have enough adhesive that's gonna get wrapped around there, but also bond to the surface. We're gonna be laying these vertically along this wall, which you would think you'd be laying them horizontally. But the reason why the manufacturer recommends this is that this mechanical fastener here, or sorry, adhesive fastening system that we're gonna be using relies on this component here. And this is gonna be spanning across all these metal sections here. So if we place this panel this way, and we might want to land it, you know, in a certain area where we need to put this panel, we might end up missing all these metal areas that adhesive is bonded directly to that. So in this case, we're going to be running it the way the manufacturer recommends, which is going to be vertically, and that's going to give us the most adhesion points to be able to grab onto. Now, when we're doing that, we want to lay out these panels vertically so we can kind of get an idea of exactly where we need to fasten something. In this case, do you need that section cut off at the bottom so that you can nail your baseboards directly into that integrated stud? Or do you need to take some off the bottom so that you can get your 16-inch stud layout to allow you to fasten something at the top, such as a ceiling stud or some type of crown molding? So in this case, 16 on center is going to put us just below this top rail. And with the way that we insulate this, we need to mechanically fasten something right in this vicinity. So I want to try and land a stud right there, which tells me 16 inches to center off of right here is going to put me about there. which means, and this is how, you don't have to go crazy with this. I literally just am marking it with my finger. I gotta take about 2 inches off that panel to get myself a stud exactly where I want it at the top. So all we're gonna do is just take a couple of these panels. We're gonna make sure we're cutting it off the left side of the panel with the InSoFast facing up. We're gonna take 2 inches off each of these panels, or in this case, possibly 3, and then we'll build our way up that wall. This facing to the right, or that you just have this fin here that connects to the top one on the top of the panel, so that when you're cutting off the bottom, you have that flat edge to cut off. And now we already determined we need about 2 inches off this bottom. So what you can do is just lay this panel down, make sure you're measuring off of the right point all the way out here, and figure out that 2 inches is about the edge of this line here. So in theory, I can just use that rather than making, scoring out or marking out with a chalk line or even a straight edge. And I can literally just go and cut through this whole panel right down that line, and that's going to be approximately what I need to take off. And as you can see, this cut's pretty easy. Very little effort going into this. You can do a sawzall, which will go a lot faster, but maybe not as accurate. A little bit faster. But honestly, super easy to do with like a little handsaw or anything. We're gonna do for this wall that we already determined that we need to cut 2 inches off the bottom of this panel. And again, we're gonna make sure we're cutting off this end because we wanna leave this fin on top. So when I quickly referenced before, 2 inches up happened to just be about right at the edge of this rib here. That's the nice thing with this InSoFast product. If I'm a little 1/4 inch gap, it's not that big of a deal. It's an easy, just foam it, and doesn't need to be exact, but that's a very good reference point for me. So I don't even need a straight edge or anything. I'm just gonna use this knife here and literally just run it straight down that rib, following that line. Make sure I puncture the end real well. Same thing down here, puncture down. And now, as long as I have a nice straight edge, something I can, put the leverage against here and just break that edge off the same way we would drywall. And then we can take our knife and just kind of clean up that edge. Boom, good to go. Okay, so we got these 2 first panels cut, and we're gonna find out our general placement. And depending on where you're gonna set your wall, you can adjust this with this system. We want it to be pretty close to flush about there. So that's gonna leave us an approximate measurement of about 1 3/8, so 1 foot 3/8 of an inch. And now we not only need to trim 2 inches off the bottom here, but we're gonna have to rip the entire length of this panel, which is gonna go through these studs. So in this case, we're not gonna be using that utility knife. We're gonna show you a different system and the best way to cut through these composite studs and the foam. To rip this product down, we wanna make sure we're cutting off the right side. So in this case, we've got our fin here, and we need to rip this panel to 1 3/8. So we wanna make sure we're cutting and pulling our measurements off the side that has that recessed lip that will interlock to that rib there. So we're just gonna go and take our marker and our tape measure. We'll do 1 3/8 approximately, or sorry, 1 foot 3/8, 1 foot 3/8. And then we're gonna take a straight edge of some sort, in which this case, we're gonna be using our level here, and we're gonna connect the dots right about there. And this is gonna allow us to just use that as a reference point while we cut this panel down. If we were cutting this panel this way, we would again just be using our utility knife, slicing through that, snapping it off, and you'd be good. But in this case, we have to cut through these composite studs here. So it's gonna be a little bit more complicated, but not very. And in this case, we're gonna go and use our multi-tool. Now you could use a Sawzall with a metal blade as well, but we're just gonna show you how to use this. And in this case, we do have a fine finish. So that's the most important thing to consider when you're cutting through pretty much any of this foam. You don't want a very aggressive tooth on any of the saws, whether you're using a circular saw to cut the panels, a table saw, a Sawzall, anything. You wanna have either a metal tip or a fine finish carpentry tip. And really how you're gonna be able to tell instantly is a ton of little tiny teeth not the very aggressive tooth, because it's gonna grab that foam and it's gonna be vibrating these panels. So we'll take this guy and we'll just connect the dots, go right down the line. Okay, now I'm just gonna plunge cut through right here, so I have a reference. I can connect those dots on the back side and just make sure I cut through all the way. This should be somewhere right now. Now, we got that piece cut. Now we still need to rip this bottom edge. So we'll really quickly use the same measurement we did before. We'll take the 2 inches off this panel with our knife and quickly go right across there. Make sure I cut all the way through at the bottom. Break that off. Good to go. Now that piece, we'll just dry fit, connect it in there. Make sure everything's right where we want it. And now we can copy that exact same cut for this rip all the way up, but we don't need to cut any of the rest of these until we get to that top layer. So let's go ahead, get this installed, and we'll talk about how to do the top. So when we're putting the glue on these panels here, these UX panels that are flat, we want to make sure we're applying a good amount of adhesive right on these ribs here. And then we're going to put just a couple of little dollops in some other areas. It's not required, but I like to make sure it's stuck nice and well. So the amount of glue is pretty important here. You want to make sure you're applying enough, but not in excess. So you can see I got a pretty heavy bead there. That's going to allow it to not only bond to the wall, but also wrap around that composite mechanical fastener there. Oh, we're just going to put a couple little dollops just to make sure. And then generally you want to put a little stream down that perimeter, wherever, in this case, this side is going to be against this edge here. So just on this first one, I'm going to run a bead just to make sure we get a nice good bond on that edge. And I don't need to do this everywhere. I'm just going to do it on my first starting one and the ending one, wherever I know I got to get a good adhesion. Now that panel, we're going to start right flush with this outside edge for our design. Yours might be different, but we just want to make sure it grabs nice and tight. And that first panel's in. Now we're going to go ahead and just apply that same technique through all these panels, and we'll go over the top. When we get this second panel here, you're going to make sure that, most importantly, these studs lining up, you're going to see these little puzzle pieces that InSoFast is designed so they interlock together. And a little void like that, you can see it's tight here. That's not a big deal. And that just gives us the ability to adjust the panel a little bit if we need to. But that's what you're looking for, a nice tight fit. Everything is snug together. And we're just going to make sure both vertically and horizontally, everything is nice and snug exactly the way it's intended and designed to lock together. Like a glove. Okay, that's your first row. Now we just got to finish the wall. We got Dean, the InSoFast master from InSoFast, gluing these next rows in. I'm going to start cutting the next one. That's going to speed up this process, having 2 guys. Now, this is actually something I've had a lot of problems with too, is the trickiness of getting this to lock together. When you're locking in your second row or even a third row, or where you have a section like this where it needs to lock into either the bottom or the top and the side at the same time, that's why it's InSoFast. You want to make sure you're working pretty quickly so that glue hasn't dried here. I can actually pull this panel up a little bit, get this to lock, and then drop it nice and tight. So you don't have to ever worry about cutting those fins off unless you have 3 sides that are going together and something maybe was already dried beforehand. But if you're working while all this glue is still drying, you can actually adjust these panels and get them to lock in nice and tight. In the case that you missed one of the tie down spots inside the container, the hooks that we talked about under this layer, you forgot to foam there, it's not the end of the world. So we can still see we got that one up there, and then we remembered, oh no, we didn't foam the hook down here. You want to make sure you've got a completely sealed system and that you don't have any air voids in there that can create condensation. Although we do have 2 inches of continuous foam insulation, the likelihood of getting condensation in there is very low. Let's just eliminate it 100%. So we can see this cavity should approximately be somewhere right in this vicinity. I could take my plunge cutter and take that and cut out a little hole. I can grab that out, or if I need to, I can cut it at an angle across. That's gonna allow me to pop that section out. Now, we can see back in there, there's a little tiny air void back there. We're gonna take our foam gun and just make sure we inject foam into that hole and completely seal it up. I could even take these pieces and put them back in, but I'll show you in case we didn't. You could just take this and make sure you fill this foam or this void all together. If it expands out, like right now, it's sitting pretty flush, but you're gonna see this foam's gonna expand and come out a little bit. Now I'll just take that metal Sawzall blade or something, even the plunge tool, and I'll make sure I just cut perfectly flush across the wall, and we're good to go, ready for drywall or whatever wall paneling you're gonna be putting on. Only had a couple pieces left, so we actually made the piece, and we only have a fin on one side. So that's gonna lock into this side right here. Now we cut this fin off because we have no corresponding locking mechanism on this one. So we added the spray foam, and that's gonna act like a weld between these 2 products. And put that in just like that. And you can see that foam in there is gonna weld these 2 surfaces right back together, make them nice and tight. And that way, we've made a piece that we needed without the corresponding locking to maximize the amount of product.
It's the first time he's done it on the horizontal, so we had a little bit of frustration along the top because we didn't plan the puzzle out. But once we got through it and talked about it, we got it done right and it looks good.
Yeah, so if this is the first time you're using this product, you have that tendency to automatically think of 16-on center running vertically. And typically, in any regular construction, that's how you're gonna find it. But because these have those composite studs built into them, and really the point of adhesion we need is that stud making contact with the metal, and the metal corrugated is only landing vertically wherever it is on the container. That's why we're running these horizontal. So I had to change the way I was thinking, and it made it a little frustrating in the beginning, but I know that once we apply this system to the areas we're gonna be using it, and this might not be the exact system you wanna be using for a lot of the container build designs you're working on, and that might be the CX44, which we're typically using on this side. But whenever you do need to utilize this system, this is the best way you're gonna wanna do it to manufactured specifications.
So this is 16 inches on center, and we drop this down to be about 8 inches.
Yep.
Then followed all the way up to the top, and now we have a stud along the top that we can attach to the drywall or any of the finishes. So we have a solid surface.
Correct. So yeah, that's why you can kind of see here, we don't have this ran all the way up to the ceiling, and you could. We just opted not to because we're gonna be putting some ceiling panels in that are gonna go over the top of this, and then we happen to need a nailer right here for our design.
So, and what's nice about that lip up there, if you have a 2-inch panel going into it, it will support that panel. So there's less bracing you have to do at the ceiling.
Exactly, it's a helping hand. So that's it for the UX panels being installed over your sidewall inserts. And if this isn't the way you're gonna go, then make sure to check out the CX44.